so that it's showing how that gets in there. Okay, the next structure to look at is the stomach. The stomach has, in addition to everything, all the other layers, the muscularis externa has an additional layer called the oblique layer. So the muscularis externa typically has an inner circular layer and an outer longitudinal layer, but in the stomach you have an innermost layer called the oblique, and see how the muscles are arranged in an oblique fashion. And why do you think the stomach needs to have an oblique layer?
The churning?
Yes, it's involved in churning and mechanical digestion. So that's one modification. Another modification you see is that the the mucosa is thrown into these temporary folds called ruga. Rugae is plural, ruga is singular. So as this, it's so that it can accommodate more stomach tissue. So as food comes in and stretches the stomach walls, the ruga will disappear. And when we dissect the cat today, you can kind of see that. And you can see the ruga. It's very interesting. Beware though, when you cut open the poor kitty cat's stomach, sometimes you'll see that it's filled with worms.
Whenever people get gastric bypass surgery and they get their stomach, what exactly?
One of the things that's done, let me put up a smaller picture, is a lap band surgery. So what they do is they put like a band here, and below the sphincter, but they try to create a smaller pouch here, and the rest of the thing is narrowed down. So the food comes into the pouch, and when that gets filled, neural messages go to the brain, giving you the sensation of being full. So it ends up like you put a band here, and you create a smaller pouch here, and then, so now this acts as the stomach. And it's so interesting you asked that, because in the morning somebody asked me, where exactly is the band put? And we were like debating, you can't put it here near the sphincter, because then that will keep the sphincter narrowed all the time. So somebody had that phone, one of your phones, so they kind of pulled up this stuff on the internet, and we saw the exact location where the lap band is. So it's kind of put a little below the sphincter here, and so you create a temporary pouch, and so you get the feeling. And that's usually, it's got a lot of risks associated with that, because when you narrow the contents of your stomach, obviously you're not eating a whole lot of food, and so you're not getting all the nutrients you want. So you have to eat regularly and often and all of that. And you'll learn another thing that is that the stomach wall produces certain enzymes and substances called intrinsic factor that's needed for absorption of vitamin B12. And so if you narrow the amount of stomach wall you have, it's kind of compromising your ability to digest. Okay, let's look at one more thing, or a couple more things before I start this lecture today. So stomach, let's look at the various regions. You have the cardia, where the esophagus joins the stomach. That region is called the cardia. This curved portion here is called the fundus. Stomach is a J-shaped structure, shaped like this. Right? So this is the portion where the esophagus comes and joins is the cardia. This curvature is called the fundus. This larger curvature is called the greater curvature, and this is the lesser curvature. What membrane arises from is attached to the lesser curvature? Lesser omentum. What comes out of the greater curvature? Greater omentum. So that's a good way to remember. And lesser omentum attaches the liver to the stomach. Greater omentum is a membrane that covers the rest of your organs there. So greater curvature, lesser curvature, cardia, fundus. Then you have here, the stomach itself has a body, and then it has the pyloric antrum. This is the pyloric antrum, that is the body, and this is the pyloric canal. And here's a pyloric sphincter that controls the movement of substances from the stomach into the duodenum. That thing is making me kind of so you can see that there's a sphincter there called pyloric sphincter that controls the movement of food from the stomach into the duodenum. So all along the tube you have sphincters to keep the food moving in one direction. Also, if you look here, so you can see it's a cadaver. Again, greater curvature, lesser curvature. You can see all those spots we looked at. Here, this is the anatomy of the stomach, the histology rather. You'll see that the stomach lining, or the lumen, is lined by a lot of pits called gastric pits. The gastric pits invaginate inward. You have a neck here, and then they end up in gastric glands. So the stomach lining has a very thick mucosa. You can see how large the mucosa is there. And then you have the muscularis mucosae, and then you have the submucosa, oblique muscles, circular muscles, and longitudinal muscles in the muscle wall. So let's look at the next slide and look at the details of the muscle cells, the mucosal cells here. The epithelium that lines the gastric pits, they are called surface epithelium or mucus cells. I want you to remember that because they secrete a lot of mucus. And then the mucus cells gradually become the neck cells, mucus neck cells, because they're forming the neck of the gland. And then you go down, and this is the gastric gland. There are three kinds of cells there. The blue ones are called parietal. The purple ones are called chief cells, and the green ones are called enteroendocrine cells. So here are all the details here. So these are the chief cells. These are the parietal cells. They look like these things with teeth, very vicious looking cells, parietal cells. The enteroendocrine cells. Endocrine cells, they obviously secrete hormones that regulate the stomach activity. So hormones are secreted by the enteroendocrine cells. Chief cells secrete the enzyme, the inactive form of the enzyme pepsinogen. Once it gets into the lumen of the stomach and comes in contact with HCl, it becomes pepsin. Pepsin is a protein digesting enzyme. What now? I didn't hear you. Pepto-Bismol. Pepto-Bismol neutralizes. It's called alkaline substance. Yeah, but you're kind of connecting the names. Pepsin. So pepsin digests proteins, protein is a large polypeptide, right? And so it breaks it down into smaller peptides. So long chains of polypeptide are broken into shorter peptide bonds. Now, pepsin needs an acidic environment. Every enzyme is specific in what kind of pH it needs. Pepsin needs an acidic environment, and that acidic environment is provided by the presence of HCl. Now, where does HCl come from? Remember, HCl is a very potent acid. It's a very strong acid. HCl is not secreted as HCl. The parietal cells will secrete hydrogen ions and chloride ions separately that get into the lumen of the stomach, and they combine to form HCl. So hydrogen ions and chloride ions combine to form HCl in the lumen. That is the lumen of the stomach. And once they are there, they convert pepsinogen to pepsin so that it can act on proteins. So here is my question for all of you. Why is not HCl secreted as such? And why do the chief cells just secrete pepsinogen, the inactive form of the enzyme? Why don't they secrete the active form of the enzyme?